And Austin, who should have won that primary, got entangled in a controversy over the patronage system of the Secretary of State's office. Back then, civil servants didn't give you your driver's licenses. There was no DMV or Department of Motor Vehicles of any kind. You just went to the store front that somebody ran and they sold license plates. And in return for getting that franchise for the Secretary of State, they contributed some of their income, in I'm sure voluntary, contributions to the party of their choice, which turned out to be the Democratic Party. Well, the Free Press did a big expose of it. We were obviously just after Nixon, Watergate, the kind of political reform you and I engaged in that same time period. And so it became something that Dick couldn't shake in the course of that primary election. And Regal won, and he kind of won going away. It was far from certain that he'd be elected senator because the Republicans nominated a congressional candidate named Esch from Ann Arbor, who was thought to be a pretty powerful candidate statewide. And Regal himself got in all kinds of political trouble over scandals, personal scandals, not the kind of scandal that ensnared Austin, if it was a scandal. But he did a fantastic job of campaigning, and he won. And he went on to serve with distinction.
Did you have much of a once he won the primary?
Oh, yes.
Did you work together?
His political guy called me and said, "Look, we won the primary. The party's not happy with us. Can you think of anybody we could bring into the campaign? We got to work with all these local party organizations." Again, back to organization, which was my forte. And I recommended a gentleman by the name of Rick Weiner, who went on to later make his fame by helping elect Jim Blanchard and became state party chair. But at that time, he was mostly a Detroit figure. And I suggested Rick go to work for him. And Rick called me and said, "I got a call from the Regal campaign. They want me to run their political operation. Do you have any idea how they won? Because I'm still trying to figure it out, and I don't want to walk into something I don't know anything about." And my answer, which he and I both have joked about over the years, was, well, he kind of won with smoke and mirrors. And so Rick went in there and helped him win with more than that.
Just for the record, given that we're continually involved in various kinds of scandals, sex scandals and so forth, what was the scandal involving Regal?
Well, with Regal, there were tapes that he'd made making love to somebody who wasn't his wife, and reflecting on their images that were in the mirrored ceiling, as I recall. And this scandal broke in the Detroit News. I think Martin Hayden was the editor of the Detroit News at the time. And it broke on the weekend, and the Regal campaign went into seclusion to try and figure out, canceled its appearances, trying to figure out what to do about it. It was still a very close election at that point. He was ahead, but it was close. And the first campaign appearance that they could not get out of was on that Monday, and it was in front of all things, the Detroit Women's Economic Club, which was the sort of middle class or upper class women involved in business in Detroit. And the two of them, candidates, were supposed to have a debate. And I was on the dais as the Democratic Party chairman. I was sitting next to Regal, who was sitting next to Esch, and then on Esch's left was Martin Hayden. And I think the Detroit News had actually sponsored the debate. And I could not, I just had no idea what Regal was going to do with this event. You couldn't have thought of a worse audience or a worse reintroduction of the campaign, given the scandal.
And the election's actually to be held the next day?
No, the election was still a few weeks away.
A few weeks away.
And they flipped a coin, and Regal won the coin flip, and he chose to go first in the debate. And when the debate started, he got up and he started into a conversation about why he had run for the Senate. He had a commercial on at the time of this little black kid who wanted to be a doctor, and he wanted to make sure that there was opportunities for that child to rise above his circumstances and become, all of the wonderful things that Don Regal believed in and was talking about. And he said, and then he interrupted himself, but of course I can't spend any time today talking about that with all of you because of that man. And then he pointed to Martin Hayden, not to Esch, who decided out of personal vendetta to destroy my family and invade my personal privacy. And he went on to rant and point fingers and scream at Hayden, and concluded, as I recall, although I could be wrong, but I think his conclusion was, and anyone who wants to be your United States Senator should have better moral character, and greater ethics than to sit next to Martin Hayden. So you should not vote for Ash, you should vote for me. I was absolutely stunned, but I was even more stunned by the audience reaction. The Detroit Women's Economic Club gave Regal a standing ovation. It was the greatest political performance I have seen in my entire life. And he went on to win. And Ash had no idea what to say. He was like dumbfounded. He couldn't figure out whether to go for it, dive back into the scandal, stay away from it, debate. He had no idea what to do.
Great story. 76, the rules of the game, obviously you did think back then mattered in some way,
Yes,
because
indeed.
you got involved in campaign finance and the ground on which ultimately a Democrat might win a governorship, because it had been some time and was still to be some time.
It was in 1962 that Swainson had lost, and we hadn't had it since. And in 70, there was a great outcry in the country for campaign finance reform, and we passed Watergate-related laws in 74 nationally, and states were imitating them. And in 75, 76, we had the good fortune of having a guy named Doug Ross be chairman of the Michigan Common Cause, and you were doing your citizen-oriented thing to make sure these were clean laws and so forth. And we wanted to reform the campaign finance laws as well, but our biggest goal was to limit the influence of Republican money in the race. Back then, not only did rules matter in our opinion, as the Republicans think they do now, but money mattered as Republicans think does now, and it probably still does. But the Democrats were in a terrible disadvantage just in terms of the politics of the state at that time were divided very much along economic lines, and so outside of labor, there wasn't any large pool of resource, maybe some people in the Jewish community, who could be counted on as contributors. Well, I guess except for Dick Austin's Secretary of State operation, but that kind of went away with his defeat in the primary. We wrote campaign finance law, as you well recall, that not only substituted public funding in the general election, but allowed for public funds to be given in the primary to candidates who could raise small donations on their own and have them matched. And that was obviously modeled after the national presidential primary laws, which we no longer abide by. But they were a dramatic change in Michigan, and we got it through a Democratic House and I think a Republican Senate. Milliken signed the law but challenged its constitutionality, and the Supreme Court struck down the ethics reforms, the lobbying reforms that we had also put in place. But the gubernatorial primary public funding provisions and the general election public funding provisions survived the court test, and we were able to run campaigns first in 78 unsuccessfully and then in 82 successfully using that money and that formulation. So in that sense, we were able to at least temporarily adjust the playing field.
So your party chair, Carter wins in 76.
Again, thanks to the Watergate scandal. That did a lot for me.
Yes. Your timing was good there, no question. So then the question becomes, how do the Democrats elect a governor finally? What's your thoughts on it? What's your strategy? And how did that eventually play out in your mind?
Well, there were several challenges for the Democratic Party to elect a governor. One of them was money, which we sort of fixed with the law. Another was the tendency of Democrats in the suburbs, later to be known as Reagan Democrats, but not back then, to split their ticket, and to the Romney-Milliken team's credit, on behalf of the Republican candidate who they perceived as being less obligated to a special interest, whether that was labor or, in some suburbanites' minds, the black community of Detroit or just Detroit. And as a result, we were always having difficulty with the suburban vote. Now, it's kind of ironic today, we carry the suburban vote. Blanchard got elected with the suburban vote to Congress in '74, and one of the reasons he was successful in '82 was his support and knowledge of that vote in the suburbs. But back then, it was a real urban-suburban challenge.